going to do with this channel, we will cover everything from setting up the printer, maybe even building a kit printer, running the slicer, best place to set it up, and any tips and help. Also assembling some of the models, undercoating the models, and painting the models to various different standards, either battle ready or parade ready. What I tend to use, I use Tutubox, but I use version 1.5 because the later versions of Tutubox, they have an issue with the zoom feature. When you have one model on the build plate, it's okay to zoom around, but 1.5, if you have various models on the build plate, you can zoom right through them, which I've found it's very difficult to do in the later versions. This model is from the Artisan Guild. It is part of their Patreon. It is the Jurakin, which is like the underwater creatures. I will then go through the supports, add in the supports. What I tend to do is I tend to change the angle of the supports straight away to 50 or maybe 55 degrees. I use medium supports. I tell it to auto generate from the platform. When that's done, I then change to the light supports, and I go through looking through, zooming into the model to find any islands that will appear which the program hasn't seen to support. I then go and add the supports. It's better to use the light version because that way you get less deterioration on the model when you try and take the supports off. They don't really provide any strength. They're really just there just to provide continuation of the print, so that way you don't get a fail. Once I've sorted out all of the supports for the main model, I then move the model to one side of the build plate so that I can then put the weapons and the base on the same build plate, so that when I print it off, you get everything you need to build that model all printed in at the same time and the same go. Models like this, sometimes I make the base, I increase the dimension of the base by 105%. That makes the base just that little bit bigger, so that way the figure fits a little bit better. Any more than 105, and if you have things like skulls and things on the base, then they start to look out of proportion to the rest of the model. But 105 just makes that base about another 1 or 2 millimeters bigger. After the figure has been printed, I take off the supports, I undercoat it. Usually I undercoat it with a white primer, but I don't put a thick layer on because you'll lose some of the detail in there, so I do like quite a light coating. Once that's done, I then go into start painting the figure. For this kind of figure, I'm using a green paint, and I go over the whole of the skin in the same green colour. Once it's dry, I then go over a lighter colour green, but I leave some of the deep recesses, I leave them the original dark colour, so that way they provide shade and shadow, and you get a much better look on the actual model. Once I've layered the model using the lighter colour green, I then highlight the model with an even lighter colour green, a very pale green. Once that's been done, I then paint the gold armour. I purposely used a lighter gold because the water will affect, for me I think the water will affect the gold and make it a lighter colour. It wouldn't be quite such a deep gold. I paint the weapons, paint the yellow fins, and also paint the cloth, and I also paint the net as well. Even though the net you won't really see the colour too much, it's still nice to get that done so there is some kind of colour in there. At the moment the skin, the pale light green, looks quite odd, but you don't have to worry about that, because what we will do now is we will now shade the skin using a green wash. That will darken down the highlighted green and give a much more pleasing effect and a much more realistic effect as well. This shade we then use a black wash on the net to provide darkness between the actual netting, and also we use a brown shade onto the cloth and also the weapons. Once the base is done, I then use another brown wash, but a slightly lighter brown wash than we used on the clothes and on the weapons. And once that's all done, it's all ready for the final stage. Once all the shading has been done, I then dry brush the skin using very pale green, but very, very lightly, just so it just catches the top details and the highlights rather than making quite a large amount of paint go onto the skin. I then dry brush the base and also the net, and the armour I dry brush with a little bit of silver so it looks like it's chipped, and then I also dry brushed a little bit on the weapons, but not a lot because I think they look better with the shading. As you can see, the final result, it looks quite good. For what it is and that, I'm quite happy with how that's turned out. So if you like this, hit the subscribe button, hit the bell icon to be notified of any new videos. Future videos in the channel, we will be doing more of the miniatures by Artisan Guild. We'll also be covering some Mortal Realms from Games Workshop, also some Warhammer 40k from Games Workshop, and also some other figures from another person that I follow on Patreon, where they produce caricatures of different figures, movie stars, cartoon characters, everything like that. So leave a comment on what you want me to go into and have a look at, and I'll get back to you soon. Cheers for that.